have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Humm.
I'm Ann Northrup.
Lots of news this week.
Lots of same-sex marriage cases to update you on, and we're going to talk about how the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action in college admissions in Michigan might affect marriage cases going to the Supreme Court.
And you may have read that there's a new book out by a New York Times reporter crediting Chad Griffin, who's now with the Human Rights Campaign, and lawyer Ted Olson for their work on the Prop 8 case as revolutionary. They were the starters of the revolution in the movement for same-sex marriage. And it's now being condemned as a travesty by many gay activists and writers. The book is.
Many. We'll try to give you updates on that. Boy Scouts of America has revoked the charter of a Seattle scout troop because their troop leader, an Eagle Scout, is an out gay man.
You all read about that terrible story earlier this month about that anti-Jewish killer in Kansas City. Well, it turns out he may have killed 3 men at a gay adult bookstore in 1987 and evaded prosecution.
Bad. There may be a breakthrough in the case of the lesbian couple who were murdered in Galveston, Texas.
The High Court in India will reconsider its reinstatement of the country's anti-sodomy ban.
We'll tell you why you may want to stop patronizing Dorchester hotels around the world.
The Catholic Bishop of Uganda has basically called for genocide against gay people. And you might have noticed that Pope Francis hasn't said anything about that.
Alison Bechtel and the cast and creators of the musical Fun Home, based on her award-winning book, went to Charleston, South Carolina, and performed the musical play to stand up to a bigoted legislator there.
Pat Sajak, Wheel of Fortune, he has gratuitously come out as straight.
Not a good sign. And in this busy season, Andy has seen 4 plays. I saw one of them, but we don't really have any to recommend yet. But you're going to see a couple this weekend that might be good.
I'll recommend them in advance or
Okay.
something. Anyway, we'll start with all the marriage news.
Yes. In fact, today in Oregon, they're having a hearing on the marriage case, and the Oregon Attorney General refused to defend the state's constitutional ban on same-sex marriage. The National Organization for Marriage made a motion to intervene in the case and wanted to delay the arguments scheduled for today. The judge in the case, who's gay, said, I'll hear your motion, but I'm not going to delay the arguments. So we'll have the arguments today, and then we'll have a hearing on your motion to defend this law, since no one else will, and if necessary, we'll have another hearing.
Okay. And Arkansas had a hearing on a motion for summary judgment in the same-sex marriage case there. A ruling within 2 weeks, or about basically a week from now. This is in state court. The judge seemed to be leaning our way in Pulaski County Circuit Court, but the state's argument is that people can put anything they want in their constitution, and the only appeal is to the United States Constitution.
Well, exactly, and that's our argument, that the United States Constitution trumps these state constitutional amendments.
But most of these cases are in federal court, not in state court.
Absolutely, and so the judge can make a ruling. Well, some of these, the original Massachusetts case was based on the Massachusetts state constitution.
And New York's case as well. I'm just saying most of the cases now are in federal court.
So Arkansas may end up in the federal court, but the state could overrule it. New case filed in Georgia by Lambda Legal Defense. They have filed suit for 3 couples and 1 widow. This now means that there are only 4 states in the United States that don't have
Who are they?
lawsuits pending.
Who are they?
I was afraid you'd ask me that.
I don't know.
Go to the freedomtomarry.org website to get the list of states where
the Georgia cases in the
because you may want to file your own.
The Georgia case is in the Northern District, and it is a Lambda case, but they've been joined by pro bono counsel from Brian Cave and White and Case.
Yeah.
More about which later.
Yes, about all of these things. A couple of things going on in Ohio. First of all, a congressman from Ohio, John Becker, wants to, he filed a motion in the U.S. House of Representatives to impeach our hero, Judge Timothy Black, on the grounds that he is arrogant and incompetent.
Well, lest we forget, the judges in Iowa who gave us same-sex marriage, many of them were recalled by the voters after that.
Absolutely. I don't think Becker's going to get anywhere with this petition in the House.
But in Ohio, they also got the go-ahead, advocates for same-sex marriage, to go ahead and collect signatures for an initiative overturning the ban.
More on that later, because that effort, which I've wondered about, because we're winning in court, why go to the ballot? But as it turns out, with that Supreme Court decision on Michigan, going to the ballot might turn out to be something that needs to be done. And in Ohio, Roberta Kaplan, the lawyer for Edie Windsor, who won the DOMA case at the Supreme Court, is now representing Equality Ohio, the LGBT rights organization there. She wants the Sixth Circuit to have a full en banc hearing so she can discuss the level of scrutiny the case should have. Do we get
Mama bear,
Papa bear, baby bear. But should it be heightened scrutiny, which she keeps arguing for, rational basis, which is the lowest bar. So she wants that to, she also wants to move this case to the Supreme Court first. I think she's in a race with Olson and Boyce, who have the Virginia case, and now they're trying to see who's going to get to the Supreme Court first with the marriage case.
More about which later.
Yes.
In Pennsylvania Monday, the plaintiffs and the defendants in the same-sex marriage case there have asked for summary judgment, and since there's no disagreement on the facts in the case, there's no need for a trial. The court can rule anytime after May 12th, but there's no deadline, and of course their decision could be stayed.
And it's another state where the Attorney General refused to defend the state law, and the state of Pennsylvania decided not to make any arguments against legalizing same-sex marriage. The 10th Circuit in the Rocky Mountain region held a hearing on the Oklahoma case. Last week they had heard the Utah case.
This is
it's
the appeal.
Still confusing there. Yes, it's the appeal of the district court rulings in both those cases that overturned state bans. So now it's up to the appeals court. And this is still confusing. Oklahoma is even more confusing than Utah. There are standing questions and jurisdictional questions. And we still have what looks like a split 1-1-1 among the 3 judges hearing these cases. One for same-sex marriage, one against, and one teetering in the middle.
Right. So we're done with Utah as well then?
Yes.
All right. Turn out the lights. A plurality of people in Texas who were polled now support marriage equality by a 48 to 47 margin. I'm sure there's a tolerance in there in terms of how wide it could be, but that's obviously encouraging because, they passed their anti-same-sex marriage amendment overwhelmingly there.
A couple of notes from Florida. Some of the Florida lesbians suing for marriage were invited to the White House Easter egg roll this week, along with about 40 other people from around the country who were involved in marriage lawsuits. So they all had a good time on the White House lawn. Bad news in that a judge in Florida has overturned an earlier ruling that would have forced the University of Central Florida to hand over their documents related to their they were the ones who published the Regnerus study, the crackpot from the University of Texas who doesn't even really defend his own study anymore, but it's being used by the right wing in all these marriage cases. So a court in Florida had originally ordered the university to hand over the basic documents on the study, But now a judge says, no, they don't have to.
A lot of Christians still use the Bible to discredit us, even though... in Indiana, federal judge Richard Young said that the attorneys defending the state law against same-sex marriage have not given a valid reason why the state should not recognize the out-of-state marriages of a lesbian couple, one of whom is terminally ill. The order only applies to that couple.
And back to Florida, thank you to the mayor of Orlando, who gave a great speech celebrating the diversity of Orlando, including their successful domestic partner registry, and said he's eager to have same-sex marriage legalized in Florida. And since they have about 5 lawsuits pending from the length and breadth of the state, that may happen.
And, you know, we talked about the Mozilla Firefox case where Brendan Eich was resigned because he had given money to support Prop 8 years ago. Well, a whole slew of gay conservatives and libertarians signed a letter supporting same-sex marriage and the freedom to dissent on the issue. But one of the people who signed, they're not all gay, was like Charles Murray, who is this horrible racist sociologist, is he?
It's quite a range of people, but they are all on the sort of right of center. And it is a libertarian plea for not coming down hard. You know, there's a lot of talk these days that we are punishing any dissent.
We're being triumphalist.
Well, the problem
I don't know that that's true.
Well, the problem with it is that companies have a right and have exercised it to make decisions for their corporate well-being that include making decisions about the opinions of their employees. But more importantly, the thing that I think is still the missing link on all this is that the first people to speak up against Eich's appointment as CEO were employees of Mozilla.
Many of them non-gay.
And we have yet to hear details of their complaint against him. But it seems to me if the employees of what is reputedly a good and progressive company are speaking up against the appointment of the new CEO, we need to at least hear what their reasons are before blaming outside forces for acting inappropriately.
And who cares what we think anyway? You think we brought down the power structure of the Catholic Church or the Mormon Church?
No. But we evidently have brought down the hierarchy of the Illinois Republican Party.
Oh, yes.
Well, they have a party chair who came out in favor of same-sex marriage when it was up for debate in Illinois last year. And he got a lot of pushback from members of his own party, including a bunch of leaders of the party who tried to depose him as party chair. He survived that effort, and now in new party elections, 6 of the 7 attempted ousters have been ousted themselves.
So Fred Saines, who works for HRC, right, still, is trying to say that the state parties are bucking the trend in the national party on this same-sex marriage stuff.
One more news note before we get into the Joe Becker book and the Supreme Court ruling. Two of the original marriage pioneers were Anthony Sullivan and Richard Adams, who were married in Boulder, Colorado. This is one of my favorite moments that I go back to. In 1975, when the Boulder city clerk said, you know what, there's nothing in the Colorado law that specifies gender. I'm going to give marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And she did, and for some brief moment of time, couples got married there, and then it was all thrown out. But they were married. They immediately appealed to the INS for a green card for Anthony, who was from Australia. And the answer they got from the INS, the
Immigration and Naturalization Service.
Thank you, was, you have failed to establish that a bona fide marital relationship can exist between 2 faggots.
Right, I remember that.
That was the INS.
Yeah.
So now
Sounds like the mayor of in South Carolina, more about whom later.
So now that the federal government, the DOMA's been overturned, the federal government is giving green cards to binational couples. Anthony Sullivan, who is now a widower because Richard Adams died, is appealing the 1975 INS ruling and asking for a green card finally and recognition of what was at the moment it happened, a legal marriage in Boulder, Colorado.
And yes, it'd be interesting to see what that would change retroactively.
He was the first in 1975 to sue for recognition of his marriage.
Well, what about the guys in Minnesota?
Well, for INS.
Oh, for INS. Okay, sure.
So we'll continue to follow what's going on there.
Okay.
All right, Supreme Court or Joe Becker?
Well, let's do.
Take your pick.
But let's not lose the Michigan case on the heels of this. The horrible decision, 6-2 decision from the Supreme Court, saying that the voters of Michigan were entitled to ban affirmative action on the basis of race and sex entirely in their state.
In college admissions or
everything?
everything?
I mean, anything. Anything. So, they're saying, well, we're not making any judgments about racial discrimination here. We're just saying the voters are entitled to do this.
To pass a constitutional amendment, the voters have the right to decide.
Yeah.
And to amend their own constitution.
And I just want to say that there's such misunderstanding there about I was a former human rights commissioner, of what affirmative action is. When you find that there's discrimination someplace, you don't have any black people working here, for instance. You order affirmative action. You don't just say you violated the law and you get a penalty. You have to take, this is where the term came from, affirmative action to make it better here, so that there actually is an integrated workplace.
Right.
But that's not the view of the current Supreme Court.
Well, or a few white guys who've stood up and said, what do you mean? You're discriminating against me.
Well, I mean, and that's like not looking around you and saying, obviously the reason a lot of us white guys have gotten away with it all these years is because of racism.
Exactly. And particularly in the case of a college, colleges always make decisions on admissions trying to create a class overall that they want to have at the school.
Let's get some people from South Dakota here at Harvard, that kind of stuff. All those kinds of factors enter into it.
Exactly. Many, many factors.
Well, the court has kind of gotten to the point where they say, yes, but you may not use race as a factor.
On the grounds that is discrimination.
Yes. You can't help black people or Latino people because it's discrimination.
So here's the potential problem for us. What we have been doing with these marriage cases is first, we had Hawaii as the start of the modern attempt at same-sex marriage legalization. And as a backlash to that, the United States Congress passed the Defense of Marriage Act, and 34 states, something like that, maybe more, passed state laws and constitutional amendments barring same-sex marriage. So we've been blithely saying all along, not so blithely, seriously, that this is unconstitutional, that you cannot vote to discriminate against the rights of a minority or people. And we have been going into court in the last few years and succeeding with this argument. And now here comes the Supreme Court to say, why, yes, the people can pass a constitutional amendment in a state, even if it discriminates on some basis. So what's going to happen?
Well, they're not saying that exactly. They're not saying even if it discriminates. There's, they said if you passed an amendment that took an active discrimination against a people, but that's what they're saying in the decision. You couldn't do that, but
well, the fact is that the court will do whatever it wants to do,
always.
A majority of them, and they will find a rationale for it.
And the question is whether Anthony Kennedy, who has given us all the positive decisions on LGBT rights, and written them rather, and who's fairly conservative, whether he's going to want to give up on the power of the states to pass these kind of amendments.
Well, he wrote the ruling decision in the Michigan case. There were a number of decisions, but he wrote the decision for 3 people, I think, that is the controlling decision. So you go back to the Supreme Court with a same-sex marriage case and say, all right, we want you now to legalize same-sex marriage for the entire United States. We want you to declare all these laws and state constitutional amendments unconstitutional.
Especially when marriage has traditionally been controlled by the states. And up until a few weeks ago, actually a couple of years ago, Barack Obama was saying that.
Well, and the right wing is still trying to say it, because what the court said in the DOMA case, the Edie Windsor case, is the states have a right to define marriage, but they can't do it in a way that is unconstitutional per the U.S. Constitution. So now we go back to the Supreme Court, and which way does Anthony Kennedy go? Does he try to retain his legacy of total support for the LGBT community that he did in writing the Romer v. Evans decision, the Lawrence v. Texas decision, and the Edie Windsor decision? Or does he do what he did in the Michigan case and say, in this case, we now see that the people have a right to pass these state constitutional
maybe he'll do it for
amendments.
white gay people.
Well, I suspect, I can't imagine him turning away from us at this point, and you know.
But of course, on the Prop 8 case, they just punted on that. They did not. They had an opportunity there to say that these state amendments were unconstitutional, and they did not.
Well, because there was a real issue of standing, and they really had to decide it. And they really did decide it in the way that they wanted to decide standing issues.
Now, you're saying that, but certainly the conservatives on the court wanted to decide the standing issue that way, but they had Sotomayor and Ginsburg with them on that decision, who might have wanted to go the other way on the thing, but who didn't think the country was ready for a sweeping decision that said same-sex marriage everywhere.
I think they lucked out in having, and we lucked out to some extent too, in having the standing issue be real, because it did postpone this, and there has been an avalanche post-Windsor that establishes the climate for this.
So that leads us into the discussion of this book, because that decision by the Supreme Court in the Prop 8 case, which was just a standing decision, which punted it back and said the lower court can stand. No, it didn't really rule on the merits of the case. That is now being hailed in a new book by Jo Becker, J.O. Becker, a woman, Pulitzer Prize winning, they will remind you, of the Times.
New York Times.
Yes, the New York Times, not the Times-Picayune. As the revolutionary breakthrough. That case was the revolutionary breakthrough in the same-sex marriage fight, because it was, this was brought by AFER in California, this case. Chad Griffin, a Hollywood publicist who engaged Ted Olson, who engaged David Boyce, after apparently a lot of people turned them down on the Democratic side.
Yes. All right, so the book is called Forcing the Spring: Inside the Fight for Marriage Equality. Jo Becker got Chad Griffin and Ted Olson and David Boyce to let her embed herself with their entire operation from the beginning. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if they did a little reaching out to her to create this coalition.
Well, George Bush did it during the Iraq War with the reporters.
Fine, but I'm talking about
this. I'm just saying, embedding and access.
Of course,
that's what this is about.
Time-honored tradition.
Time-honored tradition, but
you don't expect a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter from the New York Times to
gush.
So she spent 4 or 5 years.
She got in the tank. Well, so look. I mean, I haven't read the book, but I've read
the excerpt in the New York Times Sunday magazine.
I have
read a lot
of
other excerpts. Read the entire debate.
And I have to say, when you put towards the front of the book that Chad Griffin is the Rosa Parks of the movement, I would stop reading.
Unbelievable.
That is an extremely offensive kind of a statement, given all the hundreds of thousands of activists, essentially, who've come before him, who got things started in this thing.
Offensive to all the millions of activists who've worked on this. Offensive to the civil rights movement as a comparison.
Yes.
Offensive to Rosa Parks personally. And Rosa Parks would have told you she wasn't the Rosa Parks of the civil rights movement.
She was part of the NAACP.
There was a whole movement before her and around her and after her.
Right.
But Chad Griffin is a publicist and now runs the Human Rights Campaign, which is turning this, of course, churning it into a huge publicity event and money maker.
Anyway,
for
lots of indictments of this. Obviously, Andrew Sullivan, who was a conservative writer, but who was very early on in the marriage fight, quite vocal about it. who gives himself a lot of credit, and he did raise the issue in ways. And we haven't heard from Evan.
As did others before him.
Yes.
Trashes Evan Wolfson of Freedom to Marry as being an obstructionist and
crank.
Because she puts the pivot at the moment when Chad Griffin and the American Foundation for Equal Rights and Olson and Boyce decided to do this case, and that the traditional major LGBT legal organizations didn't want them to do the case because they thought it would throw off their strategy for legalizing same-sex marriage. Now, Mary Buonato in Boston, who runs Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, or is their chief lawyer, had already filed DOMA cases before this Prop 8 case was filed.
And won the Massachusetts case.
Oh, years before.
Yes, in 2003.
So what we seem to be left with this book is that it is a mostly good report on the inside of the Prop 8 case.
Well, except for the self-promotion that they engage in all the way through.
Absolutely, and the complete distortion of history and climate.
Look, I was happy to see Ted Olson get in, but of course he goes around talking about gay rights and then he endorses Mitt Romney for president, who was opposing it. So I hardly see him as, in that sense, a person who gets it on civil rights, if you can support someone like that for president. But you've got the situation where, all right, as I said, they don't win the Prop 8 case. They get it.
But at the end they say, we win.
Yeah.
But in fact, it ends up with this thing that's just standing. It is the Windsor case that provokes this avalanche of wins around the country now.
So Ted Olson says in the book, basically, well, the Windsor decision used our arguments in the Prop 8 case, which Roberta Kaplan and the ACLU had made. They're not rocket science.
Oh my God, it's offensive.
So
it just ends
Chris Geidner calls it a dangerous draft of history, and Mike Signorelli said it throws Roberta Kaplan and Edie Windsor under the bus. So now there are a couple of tidbits in the book that are kind of interesting, like the fact that Charles Cooper, the lawyer defending Proposition 8 for the other side there, has a lesbian stepdaughter, and he and his wife are helping them plan their wedding.
Yeah, he says he's evolving on the issue.
Oh, yes. She's met a lovely young woman named Casey, and our family and Casey's family are looking forward to celebrating.
You're just imitating her.
I bet you the right wing is furious that this was the guy doing their case.
Well,
because he knew about his lesbian stepdaughter during the thing, and he started to recede from.
Believe me, they're furious enough at Ted Olson. They've got plenty of people to be furious at. But again, the inside details of how this case evolved, okay. It's also interesting that all the mainstream media cares about, while the LGBT community is losing its mind over this book.
Well, let's not say that. I think we're
in a good way.
I think we're still sane, yes.
a figure of speech.
We're upset.
The mainstream media is hooked into just one other angle of this, which is the description of how Obama came to come out in support of same-sex marriage.
And that's a lie, too, because it acts like, Chad Griffin confronted him at a party, and that made the difference. I mean, when he said he was evolving, and they don't mention the reporter who got him on the record about the fact that he was evolving, they had a White House reception, and some of the people in the room said, evolve, we're wearing buttons that said evolve already before Chad Griffin ever said anything.
It's really disturbing.
And let's not forget that the Human Rights Campaign, and a lot of you, give them your money, but consider this. When DOMA was passed in 1996, they would not even downgrade members of Congress for having voted for that because, it was a wedge issue and we don't want to embarrass our friends and all this nonsense.
It's not on their HRC scorecard for 1996.
And then to read that...
The biggest vote in Congress.
And the assertion in the book is that Obama took his talking points from a meeting with Ken Mailman, the former head of the Republican Party, who was Bush's campaign manager when Bush ran on a platform of running against gay marriage in the Constitution.
We could go on.
So an extremely incomplete picture, and it's being made into a documentary on HBO. That's going to be on June 23rd.
Well, that was the other thing. They embedded the New York Times reporter, and they embedded a documentary crew.
But
so you're going to see this all come to life.
This is a knock on the New York Times for not holding up any kind of journalistic standards on this.
They printed the big excerpt in the Times Magazine. It's not just that they let their reporter go do this and do a horrible job in the book. They printed a major section of it in the magazine.
You know, the Human Rights Campaign will not comment on this. They're selling the book. They're selling the book on their website to promote themselves. The least they could say is, please, this was one person's perspective on one aspect of this case, but we give total credit to everybody, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the way I think Chad Griffin feels.
No.
I think he does feel like Rosa Parks.
Absolutely, and Joe Becker...
He wants to be on the new $1 coin or something.
Joe Becker, when asked about this, says...
Why are they giving a stamp to Harvey Milk and not Chad Griffin?
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure in a year or two we'll see that move. Joe Becker says, well, I wasn't trying to write a whole history of the marriage movement. I know there were other people, except that in the beginning of her book, she says, this is where the revolution started.
Yeah.
The revolution.
That's outrageous.
The revolution paid for with $6 million of your money to Ted Olson,
right,
who, while all these other lawyers are working pro bono or for nonprofits at moderate wages, Ted Olson now says, because he's been confronted about the charging $6 million, he says, well, we needed to charge the $6 million so donors would have a stake in the case.
What the hell does that mean? Roberta Kaplan, a private lawyer, did not take her firm one dime on the Edie Windsor case.
And
not a dime.
Paid a lot of expenses.
Yes.
It is expensive to bring lawsuits. You have tons of expenses for depositions and witnesses and transcripts and everything else.
And you know, there was a problem with Ted Olson beyond the endorsing, Mitt Romney and everything. I went to some of the forums where they spoke, and there was a naivete about what they were going to achieve.
Yep.
And oh yes, we're going to win, and and we've got all the things. This is going to do it. Didn't do it.
All right. Well, shall we move on from marriage?
Sure.
Okay. Well, here's someone who Ted Olson has not helped and who his case did not help. And that is a police chief, Crystal Moore, in Latta, South Carolina. She has been working for the police department for more than 20 years and is now the chief, except she's not the chief anymore, because the new mayor who took office in January has fired her.
Mayor Bullard.
He had a number of problems with her.
We've got some film on this, so why don't we get that out?
Let's do the local news.
Bullard is a bully. Bullard is a bully.
Dozens of supporters rallied outside of Latta Town Hall Wednesday in support of fired Latta Police Chief Crystal Moore.
This woman has been a veteran of this department and around this city and a pillar of this community for years.
Some council members say the mayor didn't follow protocol when he fired Chief Moore.
We have codes, but this mayor refused to obey anything in that book that he don't want to.
Specifically, she says Mayor Bullard should have first given Chief Moore a verbal warning, then a written one, then discussed the matter with council before giving her the boot. Some council members say Mayor Bullard didn't do any of that.
If an employee does something, you don't wait 3 or 4 days or 2 or 3 weeks to do something about it.
Instead, Williams says the mayor gave Chief Moore all 7 written reprimands in one day. They were her first reprimands during her 20-plus years on the job.
I've looked at the reasons. Some of them are questionable.
Some residents believe the mayor firing Crystal was payback. Chief Moore investigated Mayor Bullard's most recent hire, Parks and Rec Director Vontre Sellers. News 13 first broke the story of Sellers driving a Latta Town vehicle while his license was suspended back in February. Chief Moore found the mayor neglected to conduct a background check on Sellers.
Since he's been in here, it's been haywire.
Some Latta residents and elected officials say Mayor Bullard had a vendetta against Crystal well before he hired Sellers, partly because Chief Moore is openly gay.
Before he was sworn in office, he said Ann and Crystal would not have a job.
The recording of a phone conversation obtained by News 13 appears to back that up. Councilman Jared Taylor recorded Mayor Bullard saying he, quote, doesn't agree with some lifestyles.
I would much rather have somebody who drank and drank too much taking care of my child than I had somebody whose lifestyle is questionable around children. Because that ain't the damn way that it's supposed to be.
Well, I guess drunkenness is not a questionable lifestyle.
I would like to give awards and stamps to everybody in that picket line before I give it to Chad Griffin.
Yes. And there is no, the other aspect of this case is that people are saying is that she was investigating somebody he appointed.
Yes, exactly.
And that may have been some of the motivation, but the report says that he had it in for beforehand. There's no civil rights protections for gay people in South Carolina, in that part of South Carolina at least, LATA. But, you know, we talked about this case already, but Art Leonard wrote an excellent long piece about whether the Employment Non-Discrimination Act nationally really is necessary if we can build on that decision in the Library of Congress case, where a judge finally found that sex discrimination can apply to us. And if that can be interpreted nationally, we'll essentially get a judicial protection without having to add all those stupid religious amendments.
Yes, but that will require some large decision, and we're not at that point yet. Meanwhile, we told you about the substitute teacher in Lumberton, Texas, who had been fired and then reinstated, transgender woman Laura Jane Klug. Now it turns out she may not have been reinstated, so that case is confusing.
A new poll says that globally, 59% of people across 40 countries say homosexuality is morally unacceptable, but it's down to 37% in the United States of America.
Oh boy, only a third hate us?
Yeah.
In Houston, Mayor Anise Parker, we told you before, was going to propose a human rights law that included sexual orientation and gender identity, but not for employment. Well, after the brouhaha around that, she in fact proposed such a law. It does include employment and public accommodations and housing, but it only covers businesses that have at least 50 employees.
And most civil rights laws in the area and around the country, it's 15 or fewer employees.
So some say, look, just start with this, get it in place, and then you can gradually amend it.
And it does cover contractors with the city.
Yes.
Right? But the fine for violating it is $500.
Yeah, so this is, but it's nice to establish the
baseline.
Yeah, and the idea that you can't discriminate. Dustin Lance Black is feeling discriminated against. He was scheduled to speak at his, as commencement speaker at his alma mater, Pasadena City College.
Well, they invited him. They apparently invited a lot of other people, but then they disinvited him because they were worried about a controversy over the past pictures of him on the internet that were put on the internet for a little bit, of him having sex with another guy.
But who was an ex-lover who put them up
well,
as
apparently
revenge.
some of the friends of that guy put them up.
Okay.
All right, so that's the story. But finally he's spoken about this, and he says, I did nothing wrong, and I refuse to be shamed for this any longer. So
also,
it's outrageous what they did to him.
There are some actual sex scandals among the staff at Pasadena City College, so there's a little question of double standard.
You know, Dustin's only crime was having sex. If you're going to eliminate everybody, because if you're going to eliminate everybody who has sex from being a commencement speaker,
you're in trouble.
In Brooklyn, New York, in Greenpoint, a bar owner wants to turn his bar into a gay bar because he thinks he'd make more money, but his lease actually specifically forbids this may not be a gay bar. The landlord, let's say her name, Janet Berger of Manhasset, she's not talking. The owner is a guy named John McGillian, who says that gay bars don't have the issue of fighting.
Yeah, they're much more peaceful.
They're nice people. They're wonderful to deal with. But he wants a judge to declare the clause in the lease invalid, and he wants his lease extended because it expires in 10 months.
Yeah.
I don't think it's legal.
It doesn't sound like it, but we'd like more information about this. Back to South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. Well, the College of Charleston, this one even made the New York Times, has been part of a controversy because they bought thousands of copies of Alison Bechdel's Fun Home.
$52,000 worth.
Distributed them to their incoming freshmen as suggested reading, not mandatory reading.
Okay.
Suggested reading. So
This is a lesbian book.
Yeah, state legislator.
Very good one.
Big prize winner. State legislator got all up in arms, described it as mandatory reading incorrectly, and put in a bill to the legislature to rescind $52,000 in funding for the college.
That's working its way through the budget
process. It's not done yet. So the book has been turned into a very successful musical off-Broadway, going to Broadway this fall. Everybody should see it.
Lots of recent nominations.
Almost won the Pulitzer for drama, was one of the finalists. So they took the cast and crew, and Allison and Lisa Crone, the writer of the...
And Janine Tesori, the composer.
Yep. Down to Charleston and...
To an off-campus theater.
Yes, and performed it to huge acclaim. And now the right-wing legislator is saying this is a provocation.
Oh, good.
You are trying to...
Yes, he's quite correct about that. Yes. That's what happens when we push back. That's what happens. You stir things up.
Yep. So big fight going on in Charleston.
We're not taking it anymore.
Yep.
We're mad as hell.
Well, we're not taking it in Beverly Hills either, where the Gill Action Foundation has relocated their political outgiving conference, which is a private conference for major donors where they bring in a lot of speakers to educate them on issues and they can talk about strategy for major donations. So they were going to hold this at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Well, it's a Dorchester hotel owned by the Sultan of Brunei. You may have known, if you watch the show, that Brunei has just instituted the penalty of death by stoning for homosexuality and adultery and blasphemy and a bunch of other things in a country that didn't have the death penalty up until, from 1957 on.
There's also trouble because Brunei and Vietnam and I think Malaysia are identified as most favored nations in the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Pact, and so people are upset about that. And that, these trade pacts, the main thing they do is protect the patents of U.S. pharmaceutical companies, so that the poorer countries around the world cannot get access to generic drugs.
Right.
So that's another
More
problem.
on that in international news. In Kansas City, we all know about the arrest of Frazier Glenn Miller for killing 3 people at a Jewish community center and a Jewish retirement home this month. It turns out that he was implicated in a 1987 shooting at an adult bookstore frequented by gay men outside of Shelby, North Carolina. Killed 3 people. Frazier was part of what's called the White Patriot Party that put bounties on killing blacks, gays, and Jews. They arrested him with weapons and masks connected to the crime, but the feds gave him immunity and a plea to 1 count of possession of a grenade. He testified against some other guys who did not get convicted because they had alibis, and it turns out he was the only one that could be placed at the scene, but he had immunity.
Here's the other footnote. He may be an FBI informer. He had been arrested a couple of years earlier with a transgender prostitute, and the word is that they turned him then into an FBI informer, which is why he could get immunity in the North Carolina case.
And then he kills 3 people at these Jewish centers because he's an anti-Semite, killing Christians, by the way.
Hey, all right.
In Galveston, where the lesbian couple Brittany Cosby and Crystal Jackson were murdered, allegedly by maybe by Cosby's anti-lesbian father, James, who's in jail on $500,000 bail for tampering with evidence. Well, they found the car that they were in with blood in it, so that's going to add to the case here.
Yeah, and the cops are investigating all this. We hope they do a good job. And a new British study published in the American Journal of Psychiatry looks at the long-term effects of bullying, specifically on gay kids. They studied 7,700 gay kids over a period of about 40 years, and found that there were serious consequences long-term for their health, for their social standing, for their economic standing. They didn't finish school, they have worse jobs, they're suicidal. This is why you must interfere with bullying at an early age.
And they found also psychological consequences for bullies.
Absolutely.
No, not defending them, but I'm just saying it's not good for you.
You know, these schools that stand by and won't do anything and say, oh, we can't get involved in that. Terrible.
They just don't want to. It's, it's like
good news.
Okay.
University of Arizona champion swimmer Lauren Elizabeth Neidigh, Neidigh, has come out. She describes herself as happier and healthier since she has. And bad news from Seattle, where the Boy Scouts have revoked the charter of the Rainier Beach Methodist Church. They have a scout troop. They wanted to hire a guy as the scoutmaster. He said, don't do that, I'm gay, you'll get in trouble. They said, no, we really want you. And so he did it, and the scouts found out, and they said, no, you can't do this. And the church stood up for him and said, we're not firing him. And now they have lost their charter.
But they are keeping him as a youth worker at the church.
Good. In the consumer...
But bad on the scouts. This is time to defund the scouts. Don't be taken in by their allowing openly gay scouts who have to be jettisoned when they're 18.
Yes. A judge in Kansas has approved a legal name change for Chelsea Manning.
Oh, great.
The former Bradley Manning is now officially and legally Chelsea Elizabeth Manning. Congratulations.
Chelsea.
And Representative Sean Maloney, I told you last week that he had voted against the rise in the minimum wage. Well, evidently I wasn't the only one to notice that. His office got a lot of complaints, and they issued a statement saying, no, he's for the rise of the minimum wage. He just voted against it.
What the hell does that mean? That's worse than, well,
Yeah.
I don't want to say.
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
Exactly.
All right. In
International news.
Zimbabwe, dictator Robert Mugabe upped the anti-gay ante, and he said any diplomat who talks about homosexuality will be kicked out. We will never have it here. The act of homosexuality is not humane. You sound like a very humane person. He also said that he wasn't aware of gays and lesbians of Zimbabwe, which is a lie, until recently, and warned them about recruiting supporters at colleges and universities.
He's also sorry for Queen Elizabeth for what she has to put up with in the gay country of Great Britain.
I love that woman, but God, look at what she's putting up with.
In India, the Supreme Court has declared that it will hold a hearing on the curative petition to get rid of the sodomy law.
This is a last-ditch effort. The activists are really calling it a bit of hope.
Well, you know, there's good movement since the decision last week on the transgender, legalizing a third sex or non-binary gender.
Right.
The Home Guards in India have accepted 6 transgender Hijra members, and there is a transgender woman who's going to run for a seat in Parliament in India.
In Uganda, worse news. The Catholic Easter message of the bishop there, Charles Wamika, called for genocide of gays. He praised the new anti-gay law and called for a blessing for those who have worked so hard to, quote, free the land of gays. He asked parents to hand over their gay children to the authorities. A gay man in hiding in Uganda said, I wonder if I will ever hear from the Pope on this. If not, I lose all hope.
Well, in May, they're going to hold the first trial of 2 men accused of being gay and violating the new Uganda law, their sex against the order of nature law. Actually, they're accused of violating the 1950 Penal Code Act, which could put them in prison for life.
Now, the World Bank approved a $90 million loan to Uganda with what they say are stringent conditions, including not prosecuting healthcare workers for serving LGBT patients and not disclosing info on gay patients to police. But in Uganda, the health ministry is considering requiring LGBT patients to disclose their sexual orientation when seeking care.
I don't think the World Bank has actually approved it yet. I think it's their consultants who recommended they approve it with those conditions.
That's where it's going.
In Istanbul, 2 people shot at a house, killing a transgender woman, wounding her friend.
Ethiopia is not pro-gay, but the government backed off a Uganda-style anti-gay law, and a rally for it was canceled. Homosexual acts are already a crime, but the bill to make it an unpardonable crime was pulled. Still, you can get 15 years in prison for doing it. I think it's 25 if you got HIV.
Yes, and they're fighting in Namibia, where the Commissioner of Refugees says that Namibia will not grant asylum to LGBT people from Uganda. And there are LGBT activists in Namibia who are quite upset about this and are fighting that decision.
Right.
AIDS news.
Go ahead.
A couple things. We told you about the fight over Michael Weinstein last week, the head of the AIDS Healthcare Foundation in LA, who has called Truvada a party drug. Well, guess who gave him an award? The National Action Network.
Oh, I know.
Al Sharpton. As a keeper of the dream.
No.
Bad move. And there was a big town hall at GMHC last week. 300 clients, staff, the board of directors showed up. The administration says clients and staff will be involved in the new search for a CEO. They'll hold quarterly town halls. They'll consider the request for clients on the board, and they are looking for a new space.
I think they need some people of color on their search committee.
I would
and
agree
people
with
with AIDS.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
All right.
Entertainment news?
Well, you've probably all heard about the big lawsuit that a 31-year-old man, Michael Egan III, is bringing against Hollywood director Bryan Singer and 3 other big entertainment execs, accusing them of molesting him at 15 at parties in LA and Hawaii, which coincidentally had lifted the statute of limitations on filing cases like this up until Thursday. He claims all this. I mean, they're all vehemently denying it. And Singer is talking about bringing a countersuit for
defamation.
What do they call it? Malicious prosecution.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I mean, what do we know?
We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah. I took a look at just before we get to your reviews, the new MTV series, Faking It, which I enjoyed. It's a nice little half-hour sitcom kind of thing. 2 best friends in high school, 2 girls, are trying to get in with the in crowd. They get mistaken for a lesbian couple at a liberal high school. The traditional girl leader hates them, and so they have to prove they're lesbians when they're not. And so they kiss, and in the kiss, one of them discovers, oh, wait a minute, maybe I am a lesbian.
Oh.
And thus the series begins.
It. Yeah. You'll like it.
Well, it was very well done, and I liked it.
I forgot to mention that
Faking It, MTV.
In Queens, New York, this Saturday at 12:30, they're going to name a street for Gene, Jules, and Morty Manford. Gene and Jules were the founders of the Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays nationwide. Morty was a big gay activist. That's Saturday out in Flushing. I like what Dan Savage said about the Harvey Milk Stamp. Will delivering the mail with it on violate the religious beliefs of evangelical postal workers?
I'm sure we'll find out. Let's move to Broadway.
Oh, we can. I'm going to be seeing Neil Patrick Harris in Hedwig and the Angry Inch tomorrow. But last week during the show, a fan yelled out, "I love you, Neil!" And without missing a beat, Harris yelled back, "I'm doing something up here, mother effer," is what he said. He's getting a lot of good press for this.
Yeah, I got a rave review of the
New documentary regarding Susan Sontag at the Tribeca by Nancy Cates, who did Brother Outsider about Bayard Rustin. Our friend Chris Cooper says it brings this larger-than-life character into sharp focus. You can read his full review at cfcooper.net. If you want to get all the links to this, write to me at andyhum@AOL and .com, and I will put you on the list.
The Sontag documentary has a couple more screenings at the Tribeca Film Festival, but will be on HBO this fall.
So what did I see on Broadway this week? Of Mice and Men, kind of homoerotic, James Franco and Chris O'Dowd. actually of more interest than the play. I mean, I would give it a mediocre review, as did Ben Brantley. But James Franco did not like what Ben Brantley wrote, and he said he should be fired. And he said, and he called him such a little bitch in a tweet. And that is homophobic, if nothing is. As for the show,
so much for the gay-friendly James Franco.
Well, people say these things and they don't think about. Well, of course, it's sexist as well.
Yeah.
As for the show, this is the old John Steinbeck tale, and it's kind of dated. I mean, they do a pretty good job with it, but I mean, why are we doing this? Because James Franco wants to.
Wow.
You and I saw Lady Day at the Emerson Bar and Grill. It's the great Audra McDonald doing a pretty good Billie Holiday imitation in her last days in the late 1950s. All the memorable songs are there, but the show itself was kind of dreary in one note, I thought.
I thought it was painful. And I thought what she did the imitation of was Billie Holiday drunk and then high on heroin, and it was not pleasant to watch for 90 minutes. There was just no point.
I mean, I've listened to a woman buried up into the sand to her waist and then to her neck in Happy Days by Samuel Beckett.
Yeah, I walked out on that too.
Well, that was somebody we thought did a bad job of
Yes.
it. I saw Juliet Stevenson do it. She was wonderful.
Yeah, but I would not recommend
And
Lady Day.
Bullets Over Broadway, the Woody Allen movie, there you got a picture of it. Very zippy, fun Woody Allen movie. So they added songs from the 30s, turned it into an overlong, overblown evening. It's this musicalization of independent movies is kind of a trend that I would like to see end, because they're charming, and then this is Susan Stroman, who did The Producers.
Same thing with Kinky Boots, same thing with other things.
And last night...
it's the Broadway impulse to do these big spectacles that...
You've got to make it better.
Well, they don't.
Something.
By definition, they don't make them better. They're great as little movies.
And, I never read Act One, which is the Bible for people in show business, to read Moss Hart's autobiography that he wrote in the 50s, late 50s. This was the guy who directed My Fair Lady and, lots of great things. And he worked with Kaufman, George S. Kaufman, on a bunch of shows, writing a bunch of shows. But again, they don't deal at all. This is his autobiography brought to life, and there's some good performances in it, but they don't deal with his gayness at all. It's all very reverential and all that kind of stuff. So it was kind of an uninspired script by James Lapine.
Well,
sorry, folks, but I'm trying to save you some money, because there are some good shows out there. I'm seeing tonight. I saw it in London, so I can at least review and tell you. The Cripple of Inishmaan with Daniel Radcliffe is terrific.
Yeah, and also got ecstatic reviews.
Yes.
All right. Well, you can read these reviews at greater length by writing to andyhum@aol.com and getting on our mailing list. And then you'll get our weekly show note, which will give you the headlines ahead of time and remind you to watch the show every week.
And Pat Sajak said he's straight, and Ann Northrup is having a nice birthday on Tuesday.
Oh, I was hoping we'd skip that.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, we'll be back next week.
Bye.